Good morning, everyone. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to the board members, candidates, and honored guests in attendance here in Clubhouse 7 and for those who are watching us at home. My name is Cindy Whitney and I am a United Mutual resident. I will be moderating this event, the 2022 Meet the Candidates Forum for Third Mutual. The candidates are running to fill 2 seats on the Third Laguna Hills Mutual Board of Directors if the recall is approved, for a term expiring in 2022 and a term expiring in 2023. We have 4 enthusiastic candidates whom I have the pleasure to introduce at this time, and I will move from left to right. Robert Muchnick, Jules Zallen, Karen Shore, and Chris Prince. Welcome all. I'd like to take a moment to explain the protocol for today, so there will be an understanding of the process that we are using. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to make their opening statements. There will also be a 2-minute closing statement given by all of the candidates. Now, there are 2 types of questions. First are moderator questions. Prepared questions will be asked by the moderator, and each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. We will rotate which candidate answers the first question each time it is asked. The moderator will then proceed from left to right. The candidate's seating arrangement and speaking order was determined in advance by the random drawing of a neutral party. Prepared questions will be directed to all the candidates, and they will have a 2-minute opportunity, not obligation, to answer each question. Candidates will kindly only speak when it is their turn, not ask questions of or address others on the panel, nor refute or disparage comments or remarks given by another candidate. This is not a debate. The timer indicates the time remaining to both the candidate and the moderator. And also, there will be audience questions. Questions will also be submitted by audience members present in the room, and I will address these comments to this group. Audience questions will be submitted by cards provided by the corporate secretaries. Please write legibly. They will be then collected, sorted, and bundled by topic and determined in which order they will be read. Multiple similar topic questions will be sorted together. Please make no questions directed to a specific individual. The moderator will read all of the audience question cards. Rotation determined by the corporate secretaries establishes the first respondent of each new question. The timer will show candidates the amount of time they have remaining and when their time is up. If a candidate goes over their time, the moderator will thank them and move on to the next candidate. Thank you in advance for monitoring your time and your cooperation. The corporate secretaries, Michelle and Michaela, are supporting the moderator today with all the moving parts, and I am sincerely grateful for your help. So let's begin with the 3-minute opening statements by each candidate. Robert, please give your opening statement.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the VMS staff for setting up this unusual candidate forum and thank Ms. Whitney for moderating. Of course, I would also like to thank all of you for coming this morning to better understand the issues around this uncalled for and needless vote. I think it's important to understand that the recall election is a 2-part process. In part 1, you will be asked to vote for whether to approve or deny the recall of 2 hardworking, devoted volunteers, Lynn Jarrett and myself. This is an extraordinary process started by a small minority that wants to govern outside the normal processes at a cost to all of us of over $40,000. If a sufficient number of owners defeat the recall, as I believe they will, then there will be no further need for part 2, and we can go back to the serious and demanding business of the board. However, should this minority succeed in recalling Lynn and myself, Third will need 2 new directors. No matter how this recall works out, by September, we will be having our regular election for 4 board positions. I know many of you are upset by the shocking increase in our assessments. So are Lynn and I and all of our fellow board members. The extraordinary increase forced on us by our property insurance troubled all of us. As you no doubt know by now, we had no alternative. Third encountered a perfect storm, so to speak. On the one hand, our governing documents, the CC&Rs, require us to purchase 100% replacement insurance. At the same time, because our insurance companies insure internationally, fires, earthquakes, and building collapses worldwide impacted our premiums. Add to this mix the increase in our property value based on a required reevaluation. Our third mutual went from 700 million to 1.636 billion, forcing our rates to go up. It's like if you insured your car worth $10,000 and now your car is valued $25,000, your insurance goes up. Simply, there are things happening outside this community that are beyond our control but have a direct impact on us. We will have to find creative ways in the future to meet demands related to water shortage facing all of Southern California, the increased cost of electricity, supplies, and insurance while governing this community responsibly. This is not a mom and pop operation. The issues are much more complex. We have an annual budget of approximately $45 million. We share over 700 VMS employees. We need people with knowledge and experience to guide us through this year's budget process. I urge you to vote no for the recall so we can get back to the business at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Muchnick. Mr. Zalin, your 3-minute opening statement.
I want to refocus on what this election is all about. This forum is unfair to the recall process, and it is so obviously biased in favor of Robert Muchnick due to the way the forum is intentionally set up as a typical election event. So this puts the emphasis on the wrong syllable. It's not a typical competition where candidates claim they'll make the best directors. This is a recall election where the question is whether the director's actions or inactions render them unfit to remain in office. So you see how irrelevant the questions are about knowledge. Hey, I'll stipulate Robert Muchnick knows an awful lot more about the workings of the board than I know. But his knowledge is not an issue. His competence is. The current vote focuses on the removal of directors, yet the single event that VMS is promoting here is a classic election of directors. Their ground rules admit that the questions came from earlier election of director forums. The recall petition reads, petition to remove Muchnick and Jarrett. The board announced this as a recall exercise. The first ballot question is whether to recall Muchnick and Jarrett. The replacement issue may never come up. It's totally dependent on the recall. This event was advertised in Team Up as a third recall Meet the Candidates Forum. But to read the rules of this event, the sole issue this audience will hear is which of these candidates make the best director. If you didn't know that a recall was in process, you'd think this was just another competition for 2 open board seats. So this supposedly unbiased event seeks to completely hide the only important issue we'll be voting on in another couple of days. And that's just the way the third board wants it, and that's just the way Mr. Muchnick wants it. It sure would make sure that the reasons for the recall are never mentioned because they don't want the recall discussed, but you're entitled to hear them. So I'll use all my time to explain why 700 members quickly signed my recall petition. Recalls are serious business, only undertaken in the most extreme circumstances. You deserve a sober presentation of our accusations. I intend to give you just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zalin. Ms. Shore, your 3-minute opening statement.
I am the only independent new candidate. I gladly run my own campaign and am happy to have this opportunity. I'm happy to have this opportunity to speak with you today. I support the recall of Mr. Muchnick and Ms. Jarrett. We have all seen their emails as it and their pictures, as if linked by wedding rings, and messages from friends of how wonderful they both are. But one gets a much different view of them during board meetings, which is why 700 of their neighbors signed a petition to recall them. There are 4 things that you can do. Number 1, vote. Please vote. Be informed. Help a neighbor vote. Everyone who receives the ballot needs to cast that ballot because we need a quorum. We need a minimum number of completed ballots turned in to make our votes count. So please vote in this election. Number 2, vote yes on the recall. Mr. Munchnick wrongly led the board to approve the 2022 budget for our $1.6 billion of property insurance. The 2022 budget then required our dues to be increased to the maximum amount allowed by law. Because that increase would not cover our costs, he told residents that the dues would be increased again in 2023. At town hall meetings, you would have heard just how many critical residents were of his decision to purchase that much insurance. At the October 19th board meeting, we witnessed the deceptive manner in which Lynn Jarrett corroborated with Mr. Munchnick's scheme to get her placed back on 3rd board after her failed re-election. Sadly, this lack of judgment, of fiduciary duty, and lack of integrity are both very legitimate reasons to recall these 2 directors. Number 3, vote for 2 new board members. We need a well-informed board. Vote for board members who are willing to put in the effort and to understand the topics. Open, discuss matters, and then be able to confidently vote independently and without undue influence. Number 4, vote for me, Karen Shore. As one who is a lifelong learner and critical thinker, I believe I can contribute to the board and to our community. As a retired healthcare provider, I believe that no board member is qualified to make health policy for our community. That role is solely for our public health officers and agencies to determine. I promise that I will vote against any such abuse of position. Lastly, our board should focus their efforts on the purpose of our bylaws, that is, to manage, operate, and maintain our housing in accordance with the law. Nothing more and nothing less. Thank you.
Ms. Prince, would you kindly give your opening statement?
Good morning and welcome to today's forum. My interest in serving on the board began during the latter part of last year. I watched a board meeting which discussed the issue of the president's need for a cell phone and a secretary. Thinking I had a win-win solution, I reached out to both the president of the board and the Good Governance Coalition. I offered to volunteer my services for the secretary position. In other words, the president would get the secretarial service he needed while not burdening the residents for the cost of such service. My offer was declined. I bring this to your attention to show an example of my common sense problem-solving skills. I have over 40 years experience in the legal field in both the corporate and law firm setting, including serving 19 years with Amgen, a worldwide biotech company. I served as senior compliance manager with the healthcare compliance department, where I received numerous awards and was recognized for my critical thinking. I provided support to the corporate integrity team and executed a playbook on the on-site visit of the Office of Inspector General. I also served as senior specialist paralegal with Amgen's law department, functioning as a Section 16 trading compliance officer and filing coordinator, interfacing with the senior executives, the board of directors, and their respective brokers to ensure compliance with the company's insider trading policy. In addition, I also served 6 years in the United States Marine Corps. I'm confident my experience in the legal field, as well as my experience as a member of the Orange County Grand Jury, my experience as past president of both the Orange County Paralegal Association and the Laguna Woods Women's Golf Club has prepared me for the challenges of being a member on the board. In addition to my skill set, I will also bring to the position my core values: do the right thing, and avoid even the appearance of impropriety. Thank you.
Before we move to the prepared questions, I would like to remind everyone in the audience to please silence your phones. Thank you. So we began with Mr. Muchnick initially. Now we're going to go to start with Mr. Zalin for the prepared questions. First question is, Mr. Zalin, what do you think are the most critical issues confronting Third Mutual?
The recall. This recall is like the last election, primarily reflects the membership's exasperation with the board. Our anger showed that in the landslide election in which two board candidates lost by a humiliating ratio of well over 3-1. That's unheard of. Clearly, the membership wanted nothing to do with any current director. Yet that only changed 3 board seats. The majority is still controlled by the same group of now 7. And that majority did business as usual, as if nothing had happened, as if the election results were an aberration to be completely ignored. The straw that broke the camel's back was the perfectly disreputable way in which they manipulated our vacancy procedure to put Lynn Jarrett back on, one of the losing candidates, back on the board to replace the resigning Steve Parsons. And in doing so, violated a very long-standing practice of advertising candidates to apply. Worse, Rob lied to the board in assuring them just before the vote that the practice had indeed been followed before. It hadn't, something he later admitted. But his lie probably had a lot to do with the vote he himself was touting. When word got out that the majority planned to put Lynn back on the board, hundreds of members showed up at the board meeting to voice their objections. More than 80 spoke or wrote in protest. The boardroom was filled. It spilled out into the lobby, into 2 hallways, and a separate meeting room hastily set up for viewing. In the future question cycles, I will list some of the other reasons why you should vote in favor of the recall. But right now, I'm out of time.
I am sorry, but I understood that at the beginning of this, there was supposed to be no accusations at any of the other candidates. Could you please tell me why your whole dialogue has been attacking 2 individuals?
I would appreciate if the audience would please refrain from contributing to this meeting. Please.
We have a moderator.
We have a moderator. We also have cards, question cards that you can ask your questions of. And
if I may, just for a moment, she had a question, and I'd be happy to answer it afterwards.
Mr. Zalin, you're out of order. Thank you very much. Thank you for your response to question number 1, Mr. Zalin. Ms. Short, let's continue on, and I will ask you the same question. What do you think are the most critical issues confronting Third Mutual?
I believe the quality of people that come in onto our board is of the utmost importance. Mr. Zalin touched on a few things. I mentioned the integrity of candidates and of the current board members. I think we need to have people that are ethical and that have fiduciary responsibility. I believe that having seen failure in that, where someone will almost use their ego to stick with their plan to buy excessive insurance that we clearly do not need, and more information on that is going to be coming out regarding a report that came out in August of 2020, where the level of insurance and the appropriate risk to this community will be made public. We will all learn a lot more about that process, and I hope if I'm on the board to be able to have access to that, even more information, and we can come to a much better conclusion about how much insurance we need and how we structure that insurance with our neighboring communities in here. I think having fiduciary responsibility and ethics are of the utmost importance. And if we have that, we will be able to take this community further. There's been so much animosity that people are avoiding our meetings. You can show up at a meeting and see for yourself how few people actually show up. And those that participate are met with such negativity that they get frustrated and don't come back. And I think this is what one of our panelists up here likes to refer to as voter apathy. I do not believe it's apathy. I believe it's frustration with our situation. And we need to get this fixed because we have a lot of changes in the pipeline in the next year.
Thank you, Ms. Schiller. I'll turn to you, Ms. Prince. Kindly respond to this question. What do you think are the most critical issues confronting Third Mutual?
I would say the insurance issue has been a great concern of mine, as it has been my neighbors and my friends. I believe we need to start thinking outside of the box when it comes to our insurance. I read recently where there are cities and local municipalities that use a joint powers insurance association or authority, and that may be something that could be looked into. The other issue I have is I believe the board should be held to a higher standard, especially when it comes to civility, congeniality, and collaboration. What I've seen recently is quite disturbing. I think it's quite divisive, and I think we need to return to the table and find some common ground so that we can work for the best interest of our association and our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Prince. Mr. Muchnick, would you kindly respond to this question? What do you think are the most critical issues confronting Third Mutual?
Thank you. I think right now the most critical issue facing Third Mutual is the issue of our budget and how we approach our budget going forward. We're at a critical point in terms of we have a lot of people who live in the Third Mutual who are fixed incomes, who are having difficulty paying the HOA. We have people who are talking about selling their manors because they can't afford the HOA. The reality is that will there be an increase come next year? In all likelihood, probably yes. Will it be caused by insurance? Probably not. We were finally able to budget this past year adequately for insurance so that our cost of insurance should be appropriately addressed and will not impact the next year's budget. However, there are other things that will impact the budget. Inflation is running at 8% right now. All things are going up. Every time you go to the grocery store, every time you gas up, you see the impact of inflation. So we have to take that into consideration. Also, we had no control, again, over another situation, the new trash company that's handling the trash for Third Mutual. We will see a 197% increase in the cost of trash over the next few years. All those new organic carts that you have access to, each cart cost us $29 per manor per month. In 4 years, that cost will be $75 per manor per month. That's not something we have any control over, but we have to figure out how to budget for it. So budgeting is our biggest issue as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Muchnick. I am going to reiterate that I mentioned in the beginning that we are going to make sure that we do not refute or disparage remarks made by another candidate or other members who are not in this room. This is an opportunity for you to give your ideas and your statements. So that said, let's go to the second question. I'll begin with you, Ms. Shore. What is the most important attribute that a third board member should have?
I think I touched on it a little bit earlier as some other candidates, and that would be honesty and a realization that they are not there to be in power in this community. Our board members should all be cognizant that they are representing you, the residents of this community. When you come to a board meeting, your words should be of such value to this board. We have witnessed where this has not happened. We had a social media policy to actually censor board members and other members of our community from using, of all things, Nextdoor. And that was completely unnecessary. We had at least 20 people come forward from this community and voice their opposition to this. This fell on deaf ears. That board, one by one, all voted in sync. There are 10 board members at that time who vote and block. And that is something we cannot do. We need to have independent thinkers on our boards that behold to no one and do not feel intimidated by anyone to vote a certain way. They need to weigh the information, decide what is best for our community, and something like a social media policy, I call that a social interest, a special interest that should not be covered in our boardrooms, period. We are supposed to take care of our properties as our third mutual. We take care of third mutual housing, and we look after our property, and we look after our property values. Things like the social media policy, or even that emergency rule that came out, should not have ever come across that board's plate. And so that's what I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shore. Ms. Prince, I will ask you the same question. What is the most important attribute that a third board member should have?
Ethics. I believe a board member should take their fiduciary duties responsibly and act with honor. And that is no self-dealing, making sure they ask the proper questions, vote, attend the various meetings that are required so they're well informed when they vote, and make sure they abide by the governing documents of the association.
Mr. Marchnik, the same question to you. What is the most important attribute that a third board member should have?
I've been sitting here thinking about that, and it's difficult to come up with a single attribute. I think there are a number of things that board members have to have in terms of their responsibility as a board member. One is their fiduciary responsibility. They have a trust that's placed with them in terms of representing you and doing what's right and best, not only for Third Mutual, but also you as members. I think another issue is knowledge about our governing documents, which are what controls what the board can and cannot do. Another issue is transparency, openness, communication. I think those are the kinds of things. That's why when I became president back in October, I started the weekly emails to be more communicative with you as members, to share information with you. And that appears to be getting a lot of traction with all of our members in Third, based on the comments and responses I've gotten via email and phone calls. I also think that the town halls that we hold every month have been productive in responding to questions and issues that you as members have had. And we'll continue to do those kinds of things and look for other ways to be more open and responsive to you as a community.
Thank you, Mr. Muchnick. Mr. Zalin, I will pose the same question to you. What is the most important attribute that a third board member should have?
Right now, an ability to read and understand the insurance provisions of the CC&R. It is my firm legal opinion that we currently have the right to lower our insurance coverage and therefore our insurance costs. Our CC&R specifically authorized the board to alter that coverage. Third's lawyer says otherwise. She's wrong. She's often wrong. And I've given examples of that on my blog, offthecuff.info. Interpreting documents and statutes, it's how I obtain my 15 minutes of fame. I convinced a federal judge that a statute that said right up front it was available only to parties that own federal trademark registrations could actually be utilized by anyone, including my client, the rock group Styx. That Congress had made a mistake when it wrote the bill, and the judge agreed. It revolutionized the merchandising industry, increasing their income up to tenfold, and brought me clients like Billy Joel, Willie Nelson, Dave Matthews, Dennis Rodman, Van Halen, the Three Stooges. I even got an injunction on behalf of the Pope. No kidding. I had numerous arguments with Third's lawyer, and I've written about some of them on my blog. So whether we can buy less coverage is just a matter of document interpretation, and that's right in my wheelhouse. I'm not the only lawyer taking this position. So let's hire one and then use their legal opinion as authority to lower our insurance costs. In most arguments with Gottlieb, I prepared legal briefs with detailed arguments. The only time she ever put anything in writing, it was a disaster. I discussed this in depth on my blog. She also made false statements to the board on more than one occasion to get them to agree with her. Sadly, they did. Just another reason for the recall.
We'll ask the third question. I'll begin with you, Ms. Prince. What does the term due diligence mean to you as a third board member?
It means researching the issue and I'm sorry, I'm just drawing a blank here. I'm looking at Jim Cook because he's my guardian angel when it comes to drawing a blank.
The term is due diligence.
Yeah, I should know that, or been in the legal field. But it is simply stated, it's doing your background, doing your research to make sure that the argument that is being presented is accurate, it's factual, and therefore can make an informed decision when going through the process.
Mr. Muchnick, over to you. What does the term due diligence mean to you as a third board member?
Due diligence encompasses a number of different things. First of all, I agree with Ms. Prince, it encompasses research, doing your research before decisions are made. Research can include not only reading documents, but also querying individuals who have expertise in a particular area. It may mean bringing in people who can guide you through a process if you don't have the necessary knowledge yourself. Due diligence also takes place after a decision is made. Sometimes it requires going back and re-examining a position to see whether or not you were correct in the decision that you made. And if you weren't correct, you need to make adjustments to that decision. So due diligence takes place both before and after decisions are made.
Thank you, Mr. Muchnick. Mr. Zalin, the same question to you. What does the term due diligence mean to you as a third board member?
It means addressing the budget, which is completely out of control. In my opinion, the board is wasting huge amounts of money. Our insurance costs rose from 1.8 million to 9 million this year alone, which calculates into a $98 a month per manor. Third's lawyer insists we must buy full replacement coverage, but hers is just one opinion, and I have proven her wildly wrong several times. So is Governor Brown. I'll talk about that later. Mr. Muchnick and Ms. Jarrett surely wasted more than $200,000 championing two completely unnecessary ballot initiatives they claim they needed to avoid huge increases in insurance costs and a consequent bump in our assessments. They were wrong, but we paid over $100,000.
Mr. Zalin, I'm going to ask you not to disparage another member of this panel.
I am answering the question concerning balloting, excuse me. And if we're taking time, I will answer your objection. There is no rule whatever that says you cannot talk about someone, you cannot name someone, and you cannot address the issue. The issue here
In the
is
interest of civility, I would ask you not to disparage another member of the panel. You can make your point without doing it.
This is a recall, and we have to show that people have done things that deserve the recall, because otherwise it shouldn't be recalled. So I will now continue where I was interrupted. I will do my best to consider what you're saying.
Thank you, sir.
But I will now go back and start. My point is, Mr. Muchnick and Ms. Jarrett wasted $200,000 championing two unnecessary ballot initiatives they claim we needed to lower our increased insurance costs. They were wrong, but we paid $100,000 for the two ballots and at least as much for the lawyer who dreamed up that make work. They also strongly supported retaining the worst lawyer I ever met.
Time.
Pardon me?
He can extend.
No.
I interrupted him. He
No,
can extend.
I was interrupted and I have the right, and you're entitled to know what
Just
we're doing.
continue your statement. It's all
I
right.
will, okay. In 2016, Denver Andrews charged us entirely for the whole year $109,000. The next year, Ms. Gottlieb came along and more than doubled it to $230,000. The following year, she quadrupled it to $427,000. The following year, she more than sextupled it. It just kept going up and up. More evidence, she would often attend normal board meetings. Our previous lawyer never attended normal board meetings. Our boards don't need a babysitter. We don't need that type of expenditures. We can do very, very well if we go back to what it used to be and not have a gigantic legal bill every year.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. Ms. Shore, I will ask you to respond to the same question. What does the term due diligence mean to you as a third board member?
Well, not a member yet, but hopefully I will be. I think the board members are required to use due diligence, as has been explained by others regarding research. Most things that come before the board are fairly routine. We have what's called a consent calendar. They make decisions that are much more easy to determine. Occasionally they're not. I'm sure I'm not in that room to see all the workings of it, especially closed door session. But doing due diligence, board members become knowledgeable about issues and not count on their fellow board members to spoon feed them information. They need to do their own research and understand, which means they need to take the effort to understand issues. We have some people on our board now that just let others do the work for them and then they just follow suit. I have been told by a board member when I asked them, how do you learn about, as a new board member, how to understand the financial statements that come your way, that they all are tasked to vote on. And I was told, oh, you don't really have to understand that. There are other people on the board that can help you with that. I don't find that an acceptable answer. I would not approach any board decision off of what somebody else has said. Also, along with that comes in the better business rule. You do your due diligence, you make the best decision you can with the residents in mind, not worrying about the other board members, and you vote that way. We have liability of directors that typically are only personally liable for HOA matters if they breach their fiduciary duty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shore. Thank you, Mr. Buckner. The next question, which is, what is meant by fiduciary responsibilities and how are third board members expected to fulfill them?
Fiduciary responsibility, as I said in an earlier statement, means trust. Trust is placed in a board member to do the right thing as it relates to the third mutual and as it relates to the members of third mutual. In terms of fiduciary responsibility, we have governing documents that guide us and require us to do certain things. For example, in terms of insurance, the article of the CC&Rs that addresses insurance specifically talks about 100% replacement cost as a requirement. We have an opinion from our lawyer that stipulates that 100% replacement cost is what is required of us, and we do not have any other option. That's why we went to a ballot the previous year, asking you to consider voting so that we could change the CC&Rs and be able to purchase less than 100% replacement. At a more recent board meeting, we had one of our new board members say, well, why don't we get a second opinion from another attorney? And we did. We went out at the request of the board and hired another attorney, a very well-known, very well-respected HOA attorney, and that attorney also opined on the issue of the CC&Rs and the requirement. And that attorney voiced exactly the same opinion, independently of the first opinion. That attorney said exactly the same thing. So we have two independent opinions by attorneys that we are required to purchase 100% replacement cost insurance.
Thank you, Mr. Muchnick. Mr. Zalin, the same question to you. What is meant by fiduciary responsibilities and how are third board members expected to fulfill them?
Fiduciary duties. There is nothing in our governing documents that recognizes a member's rights. Some folks insist that a board's fiduciary duty is solely to the mutual. That I found to be a singularly offensive concept. Here's a good definition of a government's fiduciary duty. New York Times columnist Bret Stephens recently wrote, membership in the free world belongs to any country government that subscribes to the notion that the power of the state government exists first and foremost to protect the rights of the individual. Exactly. And my member-centric resolution will state that all decisions made by the board must be interpreted by default to favor members' interests. This board operates as if the opposite applies. Some of the decisions the board has made would make your hair stand on end. Blackballing a member from a board seat without giving him a chance to be heard. Convicting a former director of harassment when the first notice he got was a notice of conviction sent by Sandra Gottlieb. Hiring Third's lawyer to mediate a dispute between a new member and his neighbor when the neighbor was an HOA lawyer with whom our lawyer, the mediator, had closely worked. A terrible breach of ethics. Of course, the dispute festered and the new member quickly moved to Florida. Affirming a $12,000 fine when a member's contractor violated the state safety regulation, a violation that never would have occurred if the board had been enforcing its rules in the first place. And Sandra Gottlieb was the guiding hand in all of those. None of these nightmares would have occurred if we had a member's Bill of Rights in effect. That, as I said, is my first priority.
Thank you, Mrs. Allen. Ms. Shore, over to you. The same question. What is meant by fiduciary responsibilities and how are third board members expected to fulfill them?
Tough act to follow here in the third seat. Let's see, fiduciary duty, of course, applies to our board members. It's a legal term, and it means to act on someone else's benefit while ignoring your own personal interests. In an HOA board, directors are required to act on the members' benefits. They have the fiduciary responsibility to all members to assure that any expenditure on the HOA revenues are made on behalf of the community, and that is what is appropriate. We've heard here some examples of what may not have been appropriate for you. They might have been helpful on some other board members' ego or plan of action, but that is not what's best for this community. We need to focus back onto the residents of this community, solely on the benefit of this community. And if we can just get trust built among board members and the residents, I think it'll go a long way. That will satisfy people's desire to have representation that their money is being spent for their own well-being and for our community. And when I say their well-being, I'm referring to our buildings again, because that is the primary role of what the mutual boards are to take care of, our buildings and our property values. And that's it. Thank you.
Mr. Prince, over to you. Same question. What is meant by fiduciary responsibilities and how are third board members expected to fulfill them?
Two of my colleagues here use the word trust, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. Simply stated, fiduciary duty is being held to a higher level of trust and loyalty to act in the best interest of the association and not self-dealing. For example, board members should not accept gifts, should not engage in nepotism, and should not engage in preferential treatment. Board members must also exercise a duty of care, as I mentioned earlier, by participating in meetings, diligently asking questions, keeping records, and enforcing the governing documents.
Thank you, Ms. Prince. Now, the next question, we will begin with Mr. Zallen. And that question is it's a three-parter. On what boards and committees have you served and in what capacities? Did you ever chair a board? Were you an officer of a board?
Yeah, I'll really answer that directly. When I was a board member, I was very, very active in water, on the water committee. In fact, I spent quite a number of hours every month going and visiting dozens of buildings and reading meters on my hands and knees for sometimes hours, because you have to watch you have to watch the clock keep going, because if the clock keeps going, you either have a water waster or you have a leak, right? So you had to wait sometimes 20 minutes or a half an hour. Boring as the dickens, but we actually found a lot of water wasters and we found a lot of water leaks that way. I was very, very active in landscape. I championed turf conversion, which I will talk about in a few moments. And I was very, very active in community affairs. What I really wanted to talk about was how the board sabotaged the second ballot initiative. And I think I may wait for that because it will take a lot more time than I presently have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zalin. Over to you, Ms. Shore, the three-parter. On what boards and committees have you served and in what capacities? Did you ever chair a board and were you an officer of a board?
Yes, I have. My experience on the boards here is just as a participant, as a member, a regular participant in the last couple of years. I've brought many comments and discussions to this board. More professionally, I have been involved in our national nurse practitioner organization. When I first went in, I'm a person who participates. I became the chair of the research committee for our national meetings. Whoever wanted to solicit their research or presentation, I was involved with putting together a panel of people who would judge that research, and then it would be presented at that conference. Later on, we decided to open up our own chapter of that organization of nurse practitioners in California. So I and one other person, I contacted the IRS and we started our nonprofit and became treasurer for a couple of years, and after that became the president. In my work capacity and with a local university, I was in charge of pandemic planning. I initiated, at the request of my superior, to start a committee on pandemic planning. I contacted all department leads throughout the community and throughout the campus, and we met monthly for probably a year, creating our own pandemic plan, which was common back in 2005 when people were concerned with the bird flu. Then also what was required was to come up with a business continuity plan so that every department could figure out exactly what was the essential services that needed to be ongoing and never shut down. I found an egregious lack of planning in this community when this pandemic started, that everything shut down. That never should have happened. We should have been able to open our buildings sooner when the authorities or the recommendations of the CDC said so.
Thank you, Ms. Shore. Ms. Prince, over to you. On what boards and committees have you served and in what capacities? Did you ever chair a board? Were you an officer of a board?
As I previously mentioned, I was president of the Laguna Woods Women's Golf Club, and I was also a past president of the Orange County Paralegal Association. I served also on a couple of committees when serving on the grand jury.
Thank you very much, Ms. Prince. Over to you, Mr. Muchnick. On what boards and committees have you served and in what capacities? Did you ever chair a board? Were you an officer of a board?
That's a simple question for me to answer. Obviously, I'm currently the president of Third Mutual Board since this past October. Prior to that, I served as treasurer of the board. I also have 8 years experience as president of an HOA in Hilton Head, South Carolina, before moving to California. I also served 44 years as an academic. I chaired a department. I served on numerous committees and boards related to that, including Meet and Discuss. I also represented over 6,000 faculty negotiating a 4-year contract with the state of Pennsylvania. And I served 8 years as president of my synagogue.
Thank you, Mr. Muchnick. We will begin the next question with Ms. Shore. And that question is, describe how you might handle a resident's complaint as a third board director.
Okay, now that's a good question. I've had some complaints, as others have, coming to the boards. And what I would like to have, primarily during the 3-minute limit on the member comments, is to be able to actually not be stopped. I feel like our president has currently been watching the clock more than listening to residents. Sometimes it takes a moment to complete your thoughts. Some people can speak quickly, some people don't. And some people with maybe some language, ESL, English as a second language, may have a little harder time speaking. And I have seen that some residents get cut off. Some people are more methodical, slow speakers, but deep thinkers. And when those people are obviously coming across with something important to say, they get cut off. It is absolutely rude. When you bring a problem to this community, I think the president or whoever's chairing that meeting need to use some judgment and compassion when listening to residents. That has not been felt in the last couple of years. Occasionally one, more frail resident will come forward and kindness was bestowed upon them, but that is not the usual. So I think we need to give people time to actually get their thoughts across, and they deserve a response. Oftentimes the boards sit mute and don't respond, and we only usually hear from a few people. I want to hear from all board members. I don't think any board member should be able to just sit there and not contribute to the members of this community who bring forth complaints. And that has been the routine, as if they wait for somebody in a higher authority on the board to make those comments.
Thank you, Ms. Shore. Ms. Prince, over to you. Please describe how you might handle a resident's complaint as a third board director.
I agree with my colleague here, Ms. Shore. Residents should have the opportunity to express their opinions, their complaints, and the like. One thing that comes to mind was there was a resident who did not speak English very well, and she was trying to present a complaint to the board. It seems to me it would have been gracious to provide a translator or to ask her to stay after and have a translator describe what her complaint was, because it was very hard to understand. And if you don't understand it, you can't fix the problem.
Thank you very much, Ms. Prince. Mr. Muchnick, the same question over to you. Describe how you might handle a resident's complaint as a third board director.
It's a very good question. I think it depends upon what kind of complaint it is. If it's a complaint by one resident against another resident, then I would advise that individual who's making the complaint how they can file their complaint with compliance. So for instance, if they feel that some other resident is infringing on their rights or taking over common property or doing whatever it is, that kind of complaint needs to be addressed through the compliance process. We don't get involved in a he said, she said between two residents. If it's a concern that a resident expresses about they don't like the way the landscaping looks, or they have a concern about the lighting in a 3-story garden villa, or some other kind of concern of that nature, what I've typically done, if they've emailed me, I forward that email to the appropriate VMS individual and get a response from that individual and communicate back to the resident. If it's something else like a landscaping issue, we pass that information on directly to the chair of that appropriate committee, the landscaping committee, and then that information is discussed directly with Kurt Wyman, the head of landscaping. And typically we get a response to our members within a day or two if they communicate directly with me.
Thank you, Mr. Muchnick. Over to you, Mr. Zalin. The same question. Describe how you might handle a resident's complaint as a third board director.
It would take too long, and I urge you to ask me that question at the end of this proceeding. But I want to talk more about the insurance provision and wonder why the third board sabotaged last year's ballots limited solely to that. Problems about it. Many never received their ballots. When people asked for a replacement ballot, the phone rang dead. Then it became clear that not enough folks voted, despite all the advertising and promoting. I spent scores of hours building and painting 50 vote yes signs. You've seen them. I planted them all over the community. But the Good Governance Coalition had an army of volunteers. We just didn't have enough votes. We had an army of volunteers that were ready to go out and door to door to get folks to request replacement ballots and vote. We just needed to extend the ballot deadline. In 2020, when the board desperately wanted us to pass that horrible CC&R's amendment, they extended the deadline for a full month. So the coalition begged the board to extend the deadline, yet they refused. And then Mr. Muchnick falsely claimed that I was against the ballot initiative, the one that I worked so hard to pass. Why would they deny an extension that guaranteed to deliver the votes that would allow us to change, specifically to change the insurance provisions? The CC&Rs already allow us to do that. Why not? Well, one possibility is that if the vote failed, perhaps the board could bring back that horrible 2020 amendment, and that they wanted to stuff down our throats because that at least would technically let us lower insurance. That document allowed the board to transfer expensive construction and repair costs to members. It contained Mr. Muchnick's infamous attachment E. See what happens with time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zalin. This will be the final moderator asked question, and it is to you, Ms. Prince, to begin. What do you do when the third board votes yes and you vote no on an issue that you care about?
I would present the facts of the issue as I saw them, as I researched them and the like. If after that, the board by majority voted to pass the policy, then I would go along with the majority and work towards implementing the policy.
Thank you very much. Mr. Muchnick, over to you. What do you do when the third board votes yes and you vote no on an issue that you care about?
Well, I'd have to fully agree with Ms. Prince. When I'm outvoted by the board, I have a responsibility to go along with the decision that the board makes and to implement the board decision. It's just that simple.
Thank you. Mr. Zalin, over to you. What do you do when the third board votes yes and you vote no on an issue that you care about?
I'm required to support the board's position, but I'm not required to tell people that I'm in favor of it. Let's talk about turf replacement. This is really very important. We live in an almost unique environment. We live in a Mediterranean zone characterized by dry, hot summers and cool, wet winters, 30 to 45 degrees latitude, north and south. But our landscape is typical English countryside. Large lawns, an array of thirsty, non-native plants. Replacing turf with drought-resistant plant palette would save us 60% of our labor, 70% of our water, and over 80% of our green waste costs. California has more plant diversity than any state in the country. Drought-resistant plants don't need fertilizer. They need much less trimming. Before I was fired from the landscape committee, I consulted with 3 world-class, world-renowned landscape experts. Ken Smith, who did Great Parks, Paul Kephart, who did Shady Canyon, and Dr. Bill Rowley of Cal Poly's Permaculture Institute, who actually designed our composting program. I actually got Smith, who flew to LA to come down here and meet with our landscape people for several hours. If elected, I plan to make this a major part of my effort. So why was I fired? Asked former board president Rosemary DiLorenzo. And why didn't Director McCary respond to my several offers to join the current landscape committee? You'll have to ask her also.
Thank you, Mr. Zalin. And over to you, Ms. Shore, the same question. What do you do when the third board votes yes and you vote no on an issue that you care about?
Well, that should be a very rare occasion that a vote comes down to 10-1 with our 11 members on a board. If an issue is coming forward that has to do with our property, our buildings, and our property values, it should be more clear-cut what the issue, how a vote should go. There should be maybe two sides to an issue, but it should never be that divided. I think the only time a divided vote like that would actually come forward is on something that is inappropriate to even be discussed by this board, which in the past has happened. And maybe that's where this question came from. Previously, people have brought in their own current socially inspired interests before this board. Things that we don't need to be talking about. We have like national laws, state laws, and things like that that cover us. We don't need to replicate every law that the federal government makes or the state government makes. Just make reference to them, and we don't need to police that. We know we've had episodes recently where that has happened, and residents have been accosted by security. Security against the residents, where does that come from? They're here for our safety. They are not here to police us. And this group is being massaged into thinking that they need to sometimes approach residents in a more intimidating manner. That should never happen in this community. They're here for our safety. We should feel comfortable to call them. So I just don't see how that will happen very often, but as Jules mentioned, once a vote is made, let's say it is a more sensible issue and I'm on one side and not the other. I kind of find that hard to believe that would ever happen, but you have to accept it. And like I said, you don't have to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shore. Well, those are the moderator asked questions, and we're going to take a brief moment to organize our audience questions and get those submitted. And so we'll take a moment. Yes, stretch moment. Okay, we're going to continue now with the questions that have been submitted by the audience. And we will begin. Okay, so we will begin with Mr. Muchnick this time with our questions, and the same time frame will apply. In 2018, Third stopped allowing building or wall extensions into common areas. It was a practice that had been going on for some time, beginning from the beginning of Laguna Woods. Why was that stopped? Should this be reversed?
Okay, yes, that's true. In 2018, there was a decision by the board and a resolution passed not to award common area to residents based upon a legal interpretation. I was not a member of the board at that time. I was not involved in that decision-making process, except when I got on the board that had already been implemented, and that was what the board was doing at that time and is still doing at this time. And in fact, we just had at a recent closed board session, a whole discussion about the issue of common area from a legal perspective and trying to ascertain whether or not we have the legal right to now go back and award common area to people as they requested. That is still being discussed and debated. It has now been referred to the Architectural Committee for further consideration. But as I said, I was not a member of the board back in 2018, and I did not participate in that decision-making process.
Thank you, Mr. Muchnick. Mr. Zalin, I'll ask you the same question. In 2018, third stopped allowing building or wall extensions into common areas. It was a practice that had been going on since the beginning of Laguna Woods. Why was that stopped? Should it be reversed?
I was on the board at that time. I was terribly against that decision. We have been doing it for over 50 years. We should still be doing it. Davis Sterling section 4600 A, E, 2, 3, something like that, specifically allows the board, without anybody else's permission, specifically allows the board to grant areas of common where it is generally unnecessary and it actually relieves the community of the requirements of tending that area. The reason it was done, I know why the reason it was done. It was done as a personal favor to one of our directors who lived on an upper floor and was jealous about the fact that she couldn't expand her balcony when other people could expand their patios. That was exactly what it was said. And it was a legal opinion. It was a bad legal opinion. I can give you legal advice. We absolutely have the right to do it, and nobody's harmed by it. In fact, when someone expands their patio, for example, it increases the value of their property. And you know, location, location, location. If your neighbor's property is more valuable, your property is more valuable. So there was it was a rule that was enforced punitively against Susan Smallwood, who wanted to expand by a couple of feet to allow a therapy bathtub to be put in her bathroom. It was terrible. This is a personal matter. Legally, I'll give you legal advice. We absolutely have the right to do it, and we should do it.
Thank you, Mr. Zalin. I'll ask you the same question, Ms. Shore. In 2018, third stopped allowing building or wall extensions into common areas. It was a practice that had been going on since the beginning of Laguna Woods. Why was that stopped? Should it be reversed?
I believe the writers of our CC&Rs had the best interests of the future in mind when they wrote those CC&Rs. Limiting to the floor space of your home or your private patio, I think should have been kept in place all along. It happened. I mean, that boards have allowed that sort of thing to happen is in the past. There's nothing we can do about that now, but I think it was an error for that to ever have happened. People were more lenient in those days, but nowadays I think we know that we need to make rules that everyone can follow, and number one, are fair. You know, if someone will get an extension and somebody won't, it's going to be considered unfair. So I think we need to stop it. We need to curtail that. Obviously in 2018, the decision was made to do that, and I do support that. We have had a problem recently with people extending their interiors by putting crazy looking huts for hot water heaters outside their property in the garden. Oh, well, we all get to look at that now. That's an eyesore. Just recently, we've had a resident come forward and make the cause that should no longer be allowed. The boards were allowing it, the committees were allowing it. And so now they have finally come up with a ruling that no longer will be allowed. The ones that are out there need to be disguised with proper landscaping, which is good for all of us. That is just an example. We could go on and on about the things we've seen in this community that have extended outside their property without permit. And we need to have inspections of our property on a regular basis. Our VMS, our managing company, should not rely on residents reporting their neighbors for egregious errors. We need to have regular inspections going around, and they find that our employees find those non-compliance and warn people, cite people, do what it takes so we can keep our community more harmonious among the neighbors.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms. Shore. Thank you. Over to you now, Ms. Prince. The same question. In 2018, Third stopped allowing building or wall extensions into common areas. It was a practice that had been going on since the beginning of Laguna Woods. Why was that stopped, and should it be reversed?
I am not privy and have not been privy to the details of why the practice stopped. Unless I have more information, I cannot respond to the question.
Thank you, Ms. Prince. We'll begin this next question with Mr. Zalin. And the question is, do you think it shows respect to our members if you are voted off the board by recall majority vote and then try to get right back on the board?
Actually, no, I don't. I think it's improper, but I don't think there's anything wrong with him doing that. The point is that he's trying to hold on to his seat, and the statute allows you to do it. It didn't used to. Our bylaws specifically say that a removed director cannot be a candidate for his own replacement for the next. I'm in favor of that, but the statute overruled it, so there's nothing we can do about it.
Thank you, Mr. Zalin. Ms. Shore, the same question to you. Do you think it shows respect to our members if you are voted off the board by recall majority vote and then try to get right back on to the board?
Well, is it disrespectful? Not surprising, because residents have been shown a lot of disrespect in the last 2 years from this board and from one of our candidates here. It may be his mannerisms. Sometimes it's intentional, but it is not illegal. So he can put his name back on the board. My hope, as you know, is that this recall does go through, and having this election right on top of our primaries coming up, I think was a little bit devious in some way. This all could have happened a month or two ago and not come right on top of our California primaries. But I think what we can prove here is that if residents want a recall, they need to vote, and they need to vote yes on the recall. If overwhelmingly people vote no, then those people will probably vote for the candidate who is being currently recalled. If he doesn't make he doesn't get voted back in, that should be very telling to many others. And hopefully they will, people will do their due diligence, find out about the matters of the recall, not just listen to gossip, maybe contact us. I have an email address. Everyone here probably has an email address available to you. My email address is villagevoicesoflagunawoods@gmail.com, and you can contact me for any questions regarding this, my candidacy or my thoughts on the recall. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shore. Over to you, Ms. Prince. Do you think it shows respect to our members if you are voted off the board by recall majority vote and then try to get right back on the board?
I agree with Jules, is that by statute, he is allowed to do so. My feeling is just because you can doesn't mean you should. He says his decision and his decision alone.
Thank you, Ms. Prince. Mr. Muchnick, the same question. Do you think it shows respect to our members if you are voted off the board by recall majority vote and then try to get right back on the board?
The reason I put my name forward as a candidate is that I think the whole process, the two-part process, is a very confusing process. And when you're asking people to vote yes in one point and vote no in another point, I think it's very confusing. And so I put my name forward so that in case there is that confusion, and while I believe that the part one, the vote will go against the recall and there will be no recall, but in case that does happen, I want to give the people an opportunity to reconsider and to vote for the candidate that they choose. This is the one time, probably the whole day, that I will agree with something that Jules Allen has said. In terms of the issue.
Thank you, Mr. Muchnick. Our third question will begin with Ms. Shore. How long did you actively serve on a board or club in this community?
Well, I've been a resident here for nearly 4 years. I've been in clubs for that long. I'm not sure, did you ask about serving that long or being in a club?
How long did you actively serve on a board or club in this community?
I haven't served on a board.
Thank you. Okay, over to you, Ms. Prince. Same question. How long did you actively serve on a board or club in this community?
With regard to the Laguna Woods Women's Golf Club, I served 2 years as secretary and then 1.5 years as president prior to going on the grand jury.
Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Muchnick. How long did you actively serve on a board or club in this community?
At the moment, up to this moment in time, 2.5 years. I served as a board member beginning in November of 2019. In spring of that year, 2020, I became treasurer, and then most recently this October, I became president of the board. So 2.5 years.
Thank you. Mr. Zalin, same question to you. How long did you actively serve on a board or club in this community?
I started when I first came out here in 2016, I guess, on M&C. When I was on the board, I was put on water and landscape. I was very active on that throughout the term, even after I resigned on moral grounds. I continued to work heavily on both water and landscape until I was fired. So I guess it was about 2 or 3 years on each of those. Any other groups I've been on? The bike club, I guess I'm on. But no, in terms of, it was M&C, it was water, it was landscape, and it was community activities. And I was very active in all of them, as I said, until I got fired.
May I add 20 seconds here? Since I was the first person to answer this, I did quickly realize that I have been on the Garden Villa Association for the last almost 3.5 years as a building captain. I had been a regional rep for a short period before I realized that there were some things happening in the Garden Villa Association I didn't agree with. When I moved into a 3-story building and had no building captain there and learned of the Garden Villa Association, I thought we needed to have one. So I started attending and was quickly made a building captain.
Does anyone else remember a board that they served on?
Yeah, sure.
Time goes by. Thank you very much, all. We'll go to our next question. And I will begin this question with Ms. Prince. And I'm going to abridge it a little bit because it's quite lengthy. The landscape around section 213 and gate 6 has been maintained poorly by several companies and VMS in the last 5 years. VMS says they got too little budget monies to make it beautiful. We owners want to know, we want landscape people to meet the needs. What will be done about this if elected? What will you do about this if elected?
I would work with the architectural committee as well as the landscape committee to try and resolve the issue. And if necessary, talk to the residents to find out what their concerns are.
Thank you, Ms. Prince. Over to you, Mr. Muchnick. The landscape around section 213 and gate 6 has been maintained poorly by several companies and VMS in the last 5 years. VMS says they get too little budget monies to make it beautiful. We owners here own land, our own landscape, want our landscape to meet the needs. What will you do about this if elected? Sorry.
Okay, well, first of all, this is the first time I've heard about this. This at least has not been brought to my attention by any of the people who live in that particular area. So I'm not aware of that until this moment. However, given that you've now brought that up and the people in that section are concerned about their landscaping, I don't accept that VMS has told them that they don't have the money to do that. Because we have a certain cycle and third ritual for the maintenance of shrubbery. We have a contractor that we pay for the trimming of the trees and the maintenance of the trees. We have another outside contractor who we allocate funds to do slope maintenance. So it depends upon what specific things in that particular area need to be addressed. And the person who's in charge of our landscaping committee is sitting here in the audience right now. And I'm sure that person is taking notes on that and will take that directly to the landscape committee for review and discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Muchnick. I will send this question over to you, Mr. Zalin. The landscape around section 213 and gate 6 has been maintained poorly by several companies and VMS in the last 5 years. VMS says they get too little budget monies to make it beautiful. We owners here want our landscape people to meet the needs. What will you do about this if elected?
I have to agree with Mr. Muchnick. I don't believe that that's really the case. When I was on the landscape committee, we visited cul-de-sac 212, which is pretty close to 213. And one of the problems that all of the people in 212 were complaining about was the fact that things sort of looked, the trees started to look a little bit yellowish and things. And of course, there's a reason for that. The reason is that we're now using recycled water, and recycled water simply is not as vivid as potable water. And you know what? That's just one of the problems we have to live with. But how to make it better? I would say convert to drought-resistant foliage, a plant palette that is local, that is California, and that requires less water, less work, less cost, less trimming, and no fertilizer.
Thank you, Mr. Zalin. And now over to you, Ms. Shore, the same question. The landscape around section 213 and gate 6 has been maintained poorly by several companies and VMS in the last 5 years. VMS says they get too little budget monies to make it beautiful. And we owners here own our own landscape, want our own landscape people to meet the needs. What will you do about this if elected?
This is a very important issue, our landscape in this community. Many people are not happy with some parts of that. I think in reality, though, we need to be able to have conversations, open conversations in this community about landscape. Changes are needed. This place was designed in the 60s with all these sprawling lawns and beautiful trees. It is a beautiful place to live. Maintenance of that, who knew that it would come down this many years later, how expensive that would be to switch out old shrubbery and maybe trim some trees or remove trees. Another big issue right now happening in this community is the number of trees that have been proposed to take down. There probably are some very good reasons for taking them down. People don't understand. And I think that's the issue. People need to be made to understand, feel that they're a part of this process in making these decisions. There's only so much money. And if people need to also understand when they want something that could very well equate to increase in our HOA dues. But also, primarily, every VMS department needs to be functioning fully and efficiently so that residents know that their dollars are being well spent. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Shore. We will begin this last question with you, Mr. Muchnick. And the question is, what are your thoughts about placing our millions of dollars in reserves in CDs paying 0.12%, especially when inflation is reportedly 6 to 8%?
First of all, our money or approximately $25 million, is not in CDs paying 0.12%. They were in CDs paying 0.12%. But the board has been watching and moving money appropriately as rates have been increasing. And right now, the $25 million is currently invested in treasury bills paying 0.9%.
Thank you, Mr. Muchnick. Same question to you, Mr. Zalin. What are your thoughts about placing our millions of dollars in reserves in CDs paying 0.12%, especially when inflation is reportedly 6 to 8%?
If you're looking for someone who understands finance well and can suggest where we should put our money, vote for somebody else, because this is clearly not in my wheelhouse. I will seek professional advice. I will speak to our staff. I may even speak to this guy, but the point is that I am not in a position to give you that type of advice. And I would be talking out of my blowing smoke to try to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zalin. Ms. Shore, same question to you. What are your thoughts about placing our millions of dollars in reserves in CDs paying 0.12%, especially when inflation is reportedly 6 to 8%?
I was present by Zoom at the meeting where this matter was brought up. Our president, or he was our treasurer at that time, casually brought up the fact that we were transferring $25 million of our money into a much lower yield, that we would be losing a lot of money. I don't want to put a number on it, but a normal return on our money, taking it down to a scant amount of money. And that was hyped by saying we would save on $1,700 or whatever it was, some lower amount, 17,000, but a very low amount by saving on a manager handling our money, and our money then going to these low yield accounts. The reason he proposed we needed to do this at that time was that there were two laws that were forcing us to do that, to transfer that where those accounts were kept. And so I'm on Zoom, and not one board member put their hand up and asked one question about that. That went out to this community. $25 million were being moved. Nobody said anything, and I'm frantic on Zoom. I'm putting my hand up and texting people saying, hey, I got my hand up. I wanted to ask a question. Somebody, what laws are we talking about here? So I got some brief answers finally, and what I found out was, as I researched and find out what laws there were that were in place. One law, yes, was in place that addressed this, but another was pending at our state legislature. It wasn't in place. So again, kind of a false presentation to our board members who are having to make decisions with large amounts of money. And I just think that's very unfair. Yes, we need to have them at lower yield, but I think there is some room for us to go to higher yield accounts so we're actually losing some money right now that we could be earning on our money. That's so important to this community.
Thank you, Ms. Shore. Over to you, Ms. Prince, the same question. What are your thoughts about placing our millions of dollars in reserves in CDs paying 0.12%, especially when inflation is reportedly 6 to 8%?
My knowledge in this area is dangerous, so I will stay away from it. I will leave it up to those subject matter experts to provide guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Prince. And that concludes our audience question portion. And now it is time for closing statements. So you will have 2 minutes to give your closing statement, and I'm going to start at this time with Mr. Zalin, because you're next in line.
Thank you. Anyone who's read anything that I've written knows that my two pole stars are truth and logic. So I have to tell you the truth. I didn't prepare a closing statement. However, that's pretty good because it allows me to take a look at what we've been through. I want to say one thing very clearly. I have made some very strong statements against what the board and what these directors have made. This is nothing personal against them. Anyone who volunteers to be a board member, this is a hell of a lot of work, and they should really get our thanks. So I have nothing personally. I have told Mr. Muchnick at town halls that I respected a lot of what he has done. My comment is not who he is or what he is. My problems are what the board has been doing, and the board has been making, in my opinion, a lot of mistakes. As I said, we could lower our insurance costs gigantically right now by just buying less insurance. We have a specific right to do it under the CC&Rs. We have the right to grant portions of our common property. It's in Davis Sterling, section 4600. But don't lose sight of the fact, folks, that while this whole exercise has been who's going to make the best candidate, the point is that's a complete distraction, because the only issue that really matters is the recall. And if you want to save money immediately on outrageously unnecessary expenses, on unnecessary insurance, and other decisions that simply are not compatible with a Bill of Rights for the members, vote for the recall. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Mr. Zalin. Over to you, Ms. Shore, for your 2-minute closing statement.
This recall election is a very unusual election. The fact that 700 members of Third Mutual chose to sign a petition to start this recall of 2 directors shows that this is not a frivolous matter. It is indicative of a serious problem in our community that, in my opinion, has not been addressed adequately by Third Board. Therefore, members have legally taken matters into their own hands with this recall in an attempt to fix the problems. Thank you, Jules. If this recall is not successful, we could be faced with ongoing member frustration, but as Mr. Munchnick likes to call it, voter apathy. These are trying times in our country and the world. Change seems to be coming at us whether we like it or not. If this community is to survive, we need to be able to trust our boards. Only then can we hope to revise our outdated governing documents to better meet our future needs. We need ethical people with good fiduciary judgment on all of our boards. Please vote yes on the recall and vote for 2 new directors. Hopefully, more residents will put down that golf club or racket just long enough to become involved with their boards. On the heels of this recall, our community needs even more people to consider giving some of their time to a local cause, our own HOA. These should not be lifelong board positions. They also should not be just for those in the good old boys or the good old girls club. Many in our community are well qualified and should consider getting involved. It starts by voting and getting others to vote. As we say, it takes a village.
Thank you, Ms. Shore. Now, Ms. Prince, would you be kind enough to give us your 2-minute closing statement?
As our association ages and inflation reaches levels not seen since the 1980s, it is imperative that costs and expenses are scrutinized. The board is the guardian of Third Mutual. Therefore, the actions and decisions of the board must always be in the best interest of the association and its residents. If elected, I will work diligently to look into the issue of redundancies and processes, and I will make sure that before committing to expenditures, Third Board has conducted due diligence on the matter, including consulting subject matter experts to ensure increases are necessary and reasonable. I respectfully request your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Prince. And over to you, Mr. Muchnick, the same thing. Would you kindly give your 2-minute closing statement?
Thank you, Ms. Whitney. And thank you all for attending today. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with you and share with you some ideas and things that the board is doing and to respond to the questions that you've asked. My main position is that I think that it's very important to vote no on the recall. This is not a time to put newbies on a board, especially as we're entering the issue of budgeting, which is a major undertaking. We currently have 3 new board members who have not been through the third mutual budgeting process. While they may have had experience in budgeting processes elsewhere, they haven't been through this one. And this is a $45 million operation. It is not, as I said in my opening statement, a mom and pop out of the hip pocket kind of approach. We have the need for experienced board members with knowledge to be able to guide us through the budgeting process. And this year is especially important because last year we had the major increase. We want to try to avoid that as much as possible this coming year, and I think we're in a good position to be able to do that. We're getting preliminary reports on budgets in the next few weeks from the different departments, and we'll have an idea of where we're going and what we're going to be doing. So I ask you to please vote no on the recall and to support the board as we move forward in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Muchnick. And thank you all for your time today and your interest in the governance of our community. A big thank you to Ms. Michelle and Ms. Michaela for your support today. I couldn't have done it without you. And for those candidates, we thank you for your service and your dedication to the needs of the thousands of people who are very proud to call Lily Woods Village our home. And with that, I declare this meeting adjourned.